August 1945. The Texas heat is a living thing, crawling, sticking to skin like hot oil. Inside Barracks 7 of the prisoner of war camp at Camp Swift, 50 kilometers from Austin, Greta Hoffman presses her gray uniform against her thin body. She's 28 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, hands trembling slightly as she rolls up her sleeves. 3 months ago, she wore the white uniform of a German Red Cross nurse at a field hospital near Berlin. Now she's prisoner number 31,447. Outside, the afternoon sun turns the dirt ground into a mirror of light. Greta walks between rows of wooden barracks, each step raising thin clouds of red dust that stick to her worn shoes. The camp houses 3,000 German prisoners, former Wehrmacht soldiers, Luftwaffe, some Navy, men who arrived here on crowded ships, crossing the Atlantic in chains, expecting summary executions or forced labor camps, until death. That's what Goebbels' propaganda had promised, that Americans didn't take prisoners, that Allied camps were torture chambers in disguise. But Camp Swift is nothing like that. Greta learned this in the first 48 hours. There are 3 meals a day: white bread, canned meat, vegetables, coffee. There's clean water, soap, new blankets. The American guards don't beat, don't yell, call prisoners sir when giving orders. There's even a makeshift library in one of the barracks, with books in German that someone donated. At night, some prisoners play guitar in a corner of the yard and the guards don't stop them. Greta carries this dissonance in her chest like a stone. She was trained to hate, to see Americans as enemies, as barbaric invaders, as destroyers of Europe. She learned that the Allies were weak, decadent, commanded by Jews and communists who wanted to exterminate the German people. But here in this Texas desert, nothing makes sense. The guards laugh too loud. They eat too much. They're too kind. Hoffman, Sergeant Miller's voice cuts through the silence. He's a short, stocky man with a graying mustache and eyes that always seem tired. You're coming with me. Now. Greta follows him to the administrative office, a brick building in the center of the camp. Inside, the air is cooler. There's a fan spinning on the ceiling. Captain Weber, the camp commander, sits behind a desk full of papers. He's young, maybe 35, with brown hair combed back and an impeccable uniform. Miss Hoffman, he says in English, then repeats slowly in basic German. You worked as a nurse, correct? Yes, sir. I need someone to serve coffee and water in the officers' mess tonight. Special dinner. Delegation from Washington visiting the camp. Weber pauses, looks at her with something that might be curiosity or distrust. Will you accept? Greta feels her stomach tighten. Serve Americans. American officers. She imagines their hands taking cups she holds, their gazes crossing her body, jokes in English she won't fully understand. She imagines herself in a white apron, bent over, servile, while they eat and laugh. But there's no real choice here. Yes, sir. Weber nods. 1,800 hours. The cook will instruct you. But nothing she had learned in the past 5 years prepared her for what would happen in the next 6 hours. The officers' mess kitchen is a world of steam and iron. Enormous pots bubble on the industrial stove, exhaling the smell of roasted meat and caramelized onions. The head cook is a black woman about 50 years old, thick arms, apron stained with sauce, who introduces herself as Dorothy. She looks Greta up and down without smiling. You ever served tables before? No, ma'am. Then pay attention. Dorothy picks up a metal coffee pitcher still hot. You fill the cup from the right, 3/4 full, never to the brim. If someone asks for water, you bring a new glass. Don't refill the used one. And look them in the eyes. When they thank you. Understood? Greta nods. Dorothy sighs, turns to the stove, stirs something in a pot with a wooden spoon. The silence between them is thick, loaded with something Greta can't name. It's not anger. Maybe it's weariness. Are you a real nurse, or did they just say you were? Dorothy asks without looking back. Real. 3 years on the Eastern Front, 6 months in Berlin. Dorothy stops stirring, turns slowly. Eastern Front. So you saw bad things. I did. I saw bad things too. Dorothy puts the spoon in the pot, wipes her hands on her apron. My oldest son died in Normandy. 22 years old, bullet to the head. We didn't even have a body to bury. Greta doesn't know what to say. In Germany, nobody talked like this. Nobody shared pain with the enemy. But here, in this suffocating kitchen in the middle of Texas, Dorothy is looking at her as if expecting something, a reaction, a word. I'm sorry, Greta murmurs in broken English. Dorothy shakes her head. It's not your fault. It's the war's fault. She picks up another pitcher, fills it with ice water. But listen well. In there are men who lost sons, brothers, friends. There are men still in the Pacific fighting Japanese. So you're going to be polite? You're going to smile if they ask your name and you won't argue. Understood? Yes, ma'am. At 5:45 p.m., Greta puts on a white apron over her gray uniform. Dorothy ties the straps at her back, tightens too much, then loosens a bit. You're too thin, she says. Do you eat properly here? I eat. Doesn't look like it. Dorothy places a tray in Greta's hand. Take these water bottles to the table. I'll show you where. The officer's mess is smaller than Greta expected. A rectangular room with varnished wood walls, pictures of Texas, landscapes on the walls, a long table in the center covered with a white tablecloth. There are silver utensils, porcelain plates, crystal glasses. Greta never saw Germans use porcelain for prisoners, not even for officer prisoners. Put one bottle at each end, Dorothy instructs, and stand there, near the kitchen door. When I call you, you bring the coffee. Greta obeys. She stands, hands crossed in front of the apron, breathing slowly. The clock on the wall reads 5:58 p.m. She hears voices from outside, fast English, laughter, the sound of boots on the wooden floor. Then they enter. 6 American officers. Impeccable uniforms, medals on their chests, faces ranging from 30 to 50 years old. One of them is black, the first time Greta has seen a black officer up close. He's tall, broad shoulders, has a small scar on his forehead. The others are white, short hair, some with glasses. They talk among themselves, pull out chairs, sit without hurry. Captain Weber enters last, closes the door. Gentlemen, welcome to Camp Swift. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce Greta Hoffman, a German prisoner of war who is helping us tonight. She was a Red Cross nurse. Silence. All eyes turn to Greta. She feels their weight. Curiosity, distrust, perhaps pity. One of the older officers with gray hair and round glasses frowns. Red Cross nurse or German Army nurse? Red Cross, sir. Weber responds. We verified the records. She has no party affiliation. The black officer, Greta sees the major's insignia on his uniform, tilts his head slightly toward her. Good evening, Miss Hoffman. Good evening, sir. Greta responds in slow English. But the real shock hadn't started yet. Dorothy brings the first food tray, roast beef with potatoes, glazed carrots, warm bread. Greta follows her, carrying a coffee pitcher. The room smells of melted butter and rosemary. The officers eat slowly, talk about logistics, transport schedules, statistics of German prisoners in camps throughout the South. Greta circles the table, filling cups. Her hands tremble slightly, but she controls it. Nobody yells. Nobody completely ignores her. When she fills the black major's cup, he says, "Thank you," looking into her eyes, and Greta nods, then moves away quickly. In the kitchen, Dorothy is washing pots. How was it? Fine. They're polite, most of them. Dorothy dries her hands, picks up another tray. Now take the dessert. Apple pie, 1 slice for each. When Greta returns to the room with the pie tray, the conversation has changed. The older officer with glasses, she heard them call him Colonel Davidson, is talking about concentration camps in Germany. Greta stops near the door holding the tray, not knowing if she should interrupt. Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Auschwitz. Davidson takes off his glasses, cleans them with a napkin. These aren't prisoner camps. They're extermination camps. 5-6 million Jews, gypsies, homosexuals, political prisoners, starved to death, gassed, burned. One of the younger officers, a lieutenant with a boyish face, pushes his plate aside. I saw photos. I can't eat after seeing that. The black major says nothing, but his fingers tighten on the fork. Greta sees the tension in his jaw. The question, Davidson continues, is that many Germans say they didn't know, that they were just soldiers, just nurses, just ordinary citizens. He looks at the door, sees Greta standing there. Miss Hoffman, did you know? The entire room goes silent. Greta feels blood rising to her face. She holds the tray tightly, feels the cold metal in her palms. For a second, she thinks about lying, about saying yes that she knew everything that everyone knew, or saying no that it was impossible to know that propaganda hid everything. But the truth is more complicated. I heard rumors, she says slowly in broken English, then switches to German because it's easier. We knew Jews were being deported. We knew there were camps, but we didn't know the scale, didn't know about the gas chambers, or we pretended not to know, because it was easier. Davidson puts his glasses back on. Easier. Yes. Greta lowers the tray, places pies on the table one by one. Her hands don't tremble anymore. I was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if I asked questions. Afraid of losing my job, my family. So I didn't look. I turned my face. The black major leans forward. And now? What do you think now? Greta stops in front of him, holding the last slice of pie. She looks into his eyes, dark brown, penetrating, and sees something she didn't expect. It's not hatred. It's curiosity. Perhaps compassion. I think, she says slowly, that I was a coward, and that millions of people died because people like me were cowards. Silence. Then the major, takes the pie from the tray, places it on his plate. Thank you for your honesty, Miss Hoffman. Greta returns to the kitchen. Her legs are weak. Dorothy is sitting on a stool smoking a cigarette near the open window. I heard everything, she says. You were brave. I wasn't. I told the truth. Truth isn't courage. Here it is. Dorothy puts out the cigarette in a tin can. Most prisoners lie. Say they were just soldiers. That they followed orders. That they didn't know anything. You're the first who admits it. Greta sits on the floor, leans her back against the cold wall. Admitting doesn't change anything. Doesn't change the past. But it changes the future. Dorothy stands up, extends her hand to Greta. Come. Let's clean the kitchen. They'll stay there another hour at least. Only later would Greta understand what that gesture, Dorothy's hand extended, firm, without judgment, meant. In the following days, Greta's routine changes. Captain Weber transfers her to work in the camp infirmary, a small barracks with 6 beds, basic stock of medications, 2 American nurses who treat her with professional politeness. Greta cares for infected wounds, fevers, headaches, small work accidents. German prisoners look at her with distrust at first. Some whisper traitor when she passes. Others, especially the older ones, ask about home, about Berlin, about news from Germany. There's no more Germany, Greta responds. Only ruins. One September afternoon, the black major, she discovers his name is Major James Porter, appears at the infirmary with a deep cut on his hand. He was helping repair a fence and the barbed wire slipped, tearing the skin between thumb and index finger. Blood drips down his wrist. Sit here, Greta instructs, pointing to a chair near the sink. She washes the wound with soap and water, cleans with alcohol. He contracts his face but doesn't complain, then stitches with needle and silk thread. 6 small, precise stitches. You're good at this, Porter says. I've had practice, I imagine. He watches her hands working, steady, fast, without hesitation. Will you go back to Germany when the war officially ends? Greta cuts the thread, ties the final knot. I don't know. My city was destroyed. My parents are dead. My sister disappeared. I have nowhere to go back to. Porter flexes his fingers, tests the stitches. You could stay. Good. Here, in the United States. There's an immigration program for prisoners of war who cooperate, who have no Nazi affiliation. Stay here. Greta throws the used needle in the trash, removes rubber gloves. And do what? Work. As a nurse. There are hospitals that need qualified people, especially in the South, especially for war veterans coming back with injuries. Porter stands up, rolls his sleeve over the bandage. Think about it, Greta thinks. For weeks, she thinks. She walks around the camp at dusk when the heat decreases and the sky turns burnt orange. She observes German prisoners, playing cards, smoking American cigarettes, laughing at jokes she doesn't hear. Some of them still believe Germany will rise again, that Hitler was right, that the war isn't really over. Others are broken inside, empty eyes, just waiting for transport back to Europe. Greta is neither. 1 October, night. She's helping Dorothy in the kitchen, peeling potatoes for next day's dinner, When the door opens, it's Colonel Davidson. He holds an envelope in his hand. "Miss Hoffman, I need to speak with you." Greta wipes her hands on the apron, follows him to the office. Davidson closes the door, sits. Behind the desk, points to an empty chair. "Sit." She obeys. "I received a report from the International Red Cross," Davidson says, opening the envelope, "about your work during the war. We verified your medical records, interviewed patients you treated, reviewed your political affiliations." He takes off his glasses, rubs his tired eyes. "You weren't a member of the Nazi Party. You refused a request to join the Nazi Women's League in 1942. You treated Soviet and Polish prisoners of war at the Berlin hospital, against direct orders to let them die." Greta doesn't respond. She didn't know anyone was investigating, didn't know anyone cared. "There's an amnesty process being developed," Davidson continues, "for German prisoners who demonstrate genuine remorse and who don't have blood on their hands. You qualify. You can apply for an immigration visa. You can stay in the United States permanently." "Why?" Greta asks. "Why help me?" Davidson puts his glasses back on. "Because I believe punishing all Germans for the crimes of some is as wrong as what the Nazis did. Because I believe people can change. And because you were honest that night at dinner. That counts." At that moment, Greta still didn't know that choice would change the rest of her life. December 1945. Greta signs immigration papers in Davidson's office. She'll stay in Texas, work as a nurse's aide at the Veterans Hospital in San Antonio. She'll live in a boarding house for single women, earn minimum wage, learn English in night classes offered by the local Methodist church. On her last day at Camp Swift, she says goodbye to Dorothy in the kitchen. The older cook hugs her tightly. A quick, embarrassed hug, but real. "You'll be fine," Dorothy says. "You're stronger than you think." "Thank you for everything. Don't need to thank me, just don't forget. Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget what happened. It's the only way not to repeat it." Greta takes the bus to San Antonio alone. The Texas landscape passes by the window. Dry fields, enormous sky, straight roads that seem to have no end. She carries a small suitcase with donated clothes, translated medical certificate, recommendation letter from Davidson, and a blurred photograph of her parents she managed to save when she fled Berlin. The Veterans Hospital is a low red brick building, surrounded by oak trees. Greta works the night shift, caring for soldiers who return from the Pacific with malaria, shrapnel in their lungs, amputated legs, minds that wake up screaming in the middle of the night. She cleans wounds, changes bandages, holds trembling hands, listens to stories no one else wants to hear. There's one patient, a black soldier named William, 24 years old, lost his right leg in Okinawa, who asks where she's from. Greta tells the truth. "Germany, Berlin. You fought against us?" "No, I was a nurse. I treated wounded. Germans, Soviets, Poles, whoever arrived." William is silent for a moment, looking at the ceiling. "My sergeant was German, immigrant, came here in 1938, fleeing Hitler, died saving my life at Iwo Jima, grabbed a grenade that was going to explode near me, threw it away, exploded in his hand." Greta feels something tighten in her chest. "I'm sorry. Me too." William closes his eyes. But he chose to fight against his country, chose to save people like me. That counts, doesn't it? It counts. In 1946, Greta begins night English classes. The teacher is a white woman about 60 years old named Mrs. Henderson, who lost 2 sons in the war, one in Normandy, another in the Pacific. She's tough, demanding, but fair. When she discovers Greta is German, she doesn't change her behavior. She just says, "War's over. Now we rebuild." In 1947, Greta gets full nursing certification in the United States. She moves to her own apartment, 1 room and tiny kitchen on the second floor of an old building near the hospital. She buys a used radio, listens to news about divided Germany, the Marshall Plan, the Nuremberg trials. Some Nazis are hanged. Others flee to South America. Most just disappear into the common population, pretending they never believed, never supported, never participated. Greta doesn't pretend. In 1948, she meets Major Porter again. He's passing through San Antonio, visiting family, and shows up at the hospital. They have coffee at a cheap diner near the bus station. Porter is in civilian clothes. Khaki pants, white shirt, no uniform. He looks younger without the medals. "How are you?" he asks. "Surviving." "That's good." They talk about work, about weather, about nothing important. But at the end, Porter asks, "Do you regret it? Staying?" Greta stirs her coffee. Black, no sugar, the way she learned to like it here. "No, I'd regret it more. If I had gone back. There's nothing for me there, only ghosts. There are ghosts here too. Yes, but here I can do something with them. I can care for those who survived. I can learn. I can try to, I don't know, compensate. You can't compensate for 6 million dead. I know, but I can try not to add any more." Porter smiles, a sad, tired smile, but genuine. That's enough. The years pass in thin layers of routine and small transformations. Greta works, studies, saves money. In 1952, she marries Robert, an X-ray technician at the hospital. A quiet man, divorced, no children, who care about her accent or past. They buy a small house in the San Antonio suburbs with a front yard and a stray dog Robert brings from a shelter. Greta never has children, not by conscious choice, but because of something she can't name. Fear, perhaps, of bringing new life into a world that still carries such deep scars. Or guilt for being alive, for being comfortable when so many died. In 1955, Dorothy dies of a heart attack. Greta travels to Austin for the funeral. The church is packed with family, friends, people from the black community Dorothy helped for years. Greta sits in the back, the only white person besides the priest. After the service, Dorothy's oldest daughter, a 40-year-old woman named Lorraine, approaches her. "You're the German my mother helped at the camp." "Yes. She talked about you. Said you were brave." "I wasn't. Your mother was." Lorraine smiles. "She'd say the same thing about you." In 1960, Greta becomes head of the nursing department at the Veterans Hospital. She supervises a team of 15 nurses, trains new recruits, implements care protocols for patients with psychological trauma. Korean War veterans are arriving now, younger, more confused, talking about enemies they can't see, bombs that explode without warning, cold that freezes feet inside boots. One of them, a 22-year-old boy named Thomas, asks if she met real Germans. "I am German," Greta responds. Thomas blinks. "But you work here. For the Americans. I work for whoever needs care. It doesn't matter where they come from." "What if it was a German soldier? Would you care for him?" "Yes. Even after everything?" "Especially after everything." In 1965, Greta receives a letter from Major Porter, now Colonel Porter, retired, living in New York. He writes about the civil rights movement, about marches in Selma, about violence in Birmingham. "I'm fighting another war now," he writes. "But this time, my enemy isn't across the ocean. He's next door." Greta responds. She tells about black patients at the hospital who are still treated in a separate ward, about black nurses who earn less than white ones even doing the same work, about doctors who refuse to touch black skin without double gloves. "It's different from concentration camps," she writes, "but it comes from the same place, the same fear, the same hatred." Porter responds, "At least this time, some people are fighting. You're fighting." Greta isn't sure she is, but she tries. In 1970, Greta retires. She's 53 years old, hair more gray than blonde, hands marked from decades of washing with hospital soap. Robert is sick. Lung cancer, result of 30 years smoking cigarettes. She cares for him at home exactly, as she cared for thousands of patients, but this time it's different. It's personal. It's love. He dies in 1972. Small funeral. Few people. Greta returns to the empty house, sits in the living room, looks at walls carrying photographs of the life they built together. Cheap trips to Galveston, backyard barbecues, Christmas with neighbors who became friends. She thinks about Camp Swift, thinks about that first night serving coffee to American officers, thinks about Dorothy saying, "You're stronger than you think," thinks about all the patients whose hands she held while they died, about all the soldiers who woke up screaming and she calmed with a firm voice, about all the wounds she cleaned and stitched and bandaged. She thinks about everything that could have been different if more people had chosen to look, instead of turning away. In 1975, Greta begins working as a volunteer at a Refugee Community Center. There are Vietnamese arriving now, fleeing Saigon, bringing only the clothes on their bodies and trauma in their eyes. She helps distribute food, translates documents. Her English is almost perfect now, with only a light touch of German accent, and sits with women who lost everything. One of them, a 25-year-old young woman named Lynn, asks how Greta knows what to do. Because I was also a refugee, Greta responds. 30 years ago, in a place very far from here. And you managed to rebuild? I did. It's not the life I imagined, but it's good. And it's mine. In 1980, Greta receives a phone call from Colonel Porter. He's sick, hospitalized in New York, asking her to visit him. She buys a plane ticket, first time flying, and travels north. The Manhattan hospital is enormous, impersonal, with corridors that smell of disinfectant and fluorescent light. Porter is in room 412, connected to tubes and monitors. He's lost weight, gray skin, but his eyes are still the same. Penetrating, intelligent, kind. You came, he says. Of course I came. They talk for hours. About Camp Swift, about Dorothy, about all the years that passed. Porter says he never married, that he dedicated his life to activism, that he helped found a school for black children in Harlem. I didn't change the world, he says, but I changed some lives. That has to be enough. It's enough, Greta responds. Porter dies 3 days later. Greta goes to the funeral. Packed Baptist church choir, singing spirituals, people crying and celebrating at the same time. She sits in the back again alone, and when it ends, an older woman approaches. Are you Greta? Yes. James talked about you, said you taught him that people can change, that nations can change, that the past doesn't have to define the future. Greta doesn't trust her own voice, so she just nods. It's 1985. Greta is 68 years old. She lives alone in the same house in San Antonio, now surrounded by grown trees and a wild garden she no longer has energy to trim. In the mornings, she walks around the neighborhood, greets neighbors, buys bread at the Mexican bakery on the corner where everyone calls her Doña Greta, and nobody asks about her accent. One spring afternoon, she receives a letter from Germany. It's from a niece she never met, daughter of the sister who disappeared in 1945 and who apparently survived, emigrated to Australia, married, had children, died of old age in 1983. The niece, Barbara, is tracing family history, gathering pieces of lives broken by war. I would like to meet you, Barbara writes. I would like to understand who we were before everything fell apart, Greta responds. She tells about Camp Swift, about serving coffee to American officers, about the silence in the mess hall when she admitted her cowardice. She tells about Dorothy, about Porter, about 40 years working as a nurse, caring for veterans, refugees, anyone who needed help. She tells about the choice to stay, not to return, to build a new life on the ruins of an old life. I can't change what I did, she writes. I can't undo cowardice or silence or turned eyes, but I can choose what to do now. I can choose to care instead of ignore. I can choose to look instead of turn away. It's not redemption. There's no redemption for what my country did, but it's responsibility, and that's the minimum I owe. One summer afternoon, Greta is sitting in the front yard when a car stops on the street. A young woman gets out, maybe 30 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes that remind her of her lost sister. It's Barbara, who traveled from Australia to meet her. They hug, a long, strange hug, loaded with decades of separation and loss. You look like her, Greta says. Like your mother. I know. I saw photos. They enter the house. Greta makes coffee, still the American way, strong and black, and they sit in the living room with photographs on the walls. Barbara asks questions. Greta answers all of them, doesn't hide, doesn't soften. She tells about propaganda, about fear, about complicit silence that allowed horror to happen. But you changed, Barbara says. You chose differently. Not so differently. I still carry guilt. I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about all the faces I could have saved if I had been brave earlier. But you saved others. Afterward. Yes, afterward. They stay together for a week. Barbara helps organize Greta's old papers, blurred photographs, yellowed letters, from Porter and Dorothy and dozens of patients who wrote thanks over the years. On the last day, Barbara asks, If you could go back to 1940, what would you do differently? Greta thinks. There's no easy answer. I would look, I'd ask questions, I'd refuse to ignore. Maybe it wouldn't change. Anything. Maybe I'd die trying, but at least I wouldn't live with this guilt. And that would be better? I don't know, but it would be honest. Barbara returns to Australia carrying boxes of documents and stories. Greta stays in the silent house, alone again, but not exactly alone. There are ghosts here, Dorothy in the kitchen, Porter in the garden, Robert in the living room, all the patients in the shadowy corners. But they're not frightening ghosts. They're witnesses. They're reminders. Greta dies in 1992 at 75 from heart failure. Small funeral at the Methodist church that helped her decades ago. There are neighbors, some retired nurses who worked with her, Vietnamese refugees she helped, and Barbara, who flies from Australia to say goodbye. On the headstone, there are no birth and death dates. There's no beloved wife or dedicated nurse. There's only one line, chosen by Barbara based on letters she found. She looked when others turned away. Greta Hoffmann's story isn't unique. There are thousands like her, ordinary Germans who lived under a monstrous regime, who made choices between survival and resistance, who carried guilt for decades, who tried to compensate for the incomprehensible. But her story matters because it shows something propaganda, from any side, always tries to hide, that humanity survives even in the most unlikely places, that small gestures, an extended hand, coffee served with respect, an honest question answered with truth, can break down walls, built by years of indoctrination. Camp Swift wasn't paradise. The United States wasn't innocent. The treatment of German prisoners was incomparably better than the treatment of Japanese prisoners, or Black American soldiers, or Japanese American citizens sent to internment camps. There was racism, injustice, hypocrisy on all sides. But within that imperfect context, there were people trying to do better. Dorothy, who lost a son but still extended her hand to an enemy. Porter, who faced brutal racism but chose to see humanity in a German prisoner. Davidson, who could have punished but chose amnesty. And Greta, who could have lied, fled, forgotten, but chose to admit, stay, remember. World War II didn't end in 1945. It continues in every choice we make between looking and turning away, between extending a hand and closing a fist, between seeing the other as human or as an abstract enemy. Greta understood this that night serving coffee at Camp Swift when the silence in the mess hall wasn't hatred, but recognition, that all lives are broken by war, that all nations carry shame, that the only way forward is to admit what was and choose differently now. It's not redemption, but it's responsibility, and sometimes that's all we have.